What would you do if one cold night, just before closing your restaurant, a frail old grandmother with trembling hands and a shivering little boy in torn clothes came to your door begging for nothing more than a place to stay warm for a single night? Would you turn them away, assuming it wasn't your problem, or would you open your heart and let them in, knowing you might lose something but hoping to give them a little comfort? This is the true beginning of a story that would forever change the life of one ordinary restaurant owner, a man who never imagined that a single act of kindness could alter the course of his future. The night was particularly cold, the kind of biting winter air that slipped under jackets and numbed fingertips within seconds. Inside the restaurant, the golden lights cast a warm glow over empty tables. The last few customers had just left, and Michael, the restaurant owner, was preparing to close up. Michael was a hard-working man in his late 40s, with tired eyes but a resilient smile. For years, he had poured his soul into his small restaurant, Harbor Lights, a place that had become his entire world after his wife passed away several years earlier. He had no children, no family nearby, only the restaurant and the regulars who kept him company. On this night, as he stacked chairs on tables and wiped down counters, he was thinking about how tough the past few months had been. Business was slow, bills were piling up, and sometimes he wondered if all the struggle was worth it. That's when he heard a soft knock at the glass door. At first, he thought maybe a customer had forgotten their wallet or bag, but when he looked up, his heart stopped. Standing there, under the flickering streetlight, was a small, fragile-looking grandmother, wrapped in an old shawl, holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Their clothes were worn, their shoes muddy, and the boy's cheeks were red from the cold. The grandmother's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but Michael couldn't hear her through the glass. Instinctively, he unlocked the door and opened it, and the chill immediately swept inside. "Please, sir," the grandmother said in a weak voice, "we don't want to bother you. We just a broken bar. We just need a place to stay warm for one night. Just one night, please." Michael froze. His first thought was about safety. He didn't know these people, and times were hard. But then he looked at the boy, whose small hands clutched at his grandmother's skirt while his wide eyes silently begged for comfort. Something inside Michael's heart cracked. He sighed and said, "Come in." The boy's face lit up instantly, while the grandmother lowered her head in gratitude. They stepped inside, and the warmth of the restaurant seemed to embrace them. Michael fetched a couple of blankets from the back of a old ones he kept for emergencies and draped them over the two. "Sit," he said, pointing to a booth near the heater. "You look frozen." The boy nodded shyly while the grandmother murmured a soft thank you. Michael went to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly cooked soup still lingered. He ladled some into bowls and brought it out with a basket of bread. He watched as the boy devoured the food hungrily, while the grandmother ate slowly, as if making sure her grandson had enough. Michael sat across from them, curiosity gnawing at him. "What's your name?" he asked. The grandmother looked up. "My name is Margaret. This is my grandson, Daniel." Michael nodded. "And a broken bar. Where are you staying?" Margaret hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "We don't have anywhere. Not since a broken bar. Not since his mother died. My daughter broken bar. She passed away last year. We've been moving from place to place, trying to find shelter. But the night of broken bar we had nowhere else to go." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to stop herself from breaking down in front of her grandson. Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. He had lost his wife years ago. He knew the pain of grief, the ache of losing someone you loved. He looked at Daniel, who was staring at his soup bowl, avoiding eye contact, as though he didn't want anyone to see how much he missed his mother. Something inside Michael stirred at a memory of his wife telling him once that kindness was never wasted, even when the world seemed cruel. That memory guided his next words. "You can stay here tonight. I'll close the doors, but you two can rest in one of the booths. It's not much, but at least it's warm." Margaret clasped her hands together, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Bless you, sir. Bless you." Michael nodded, trying to appear casual, but inside, emotions were flooding through him. He had opened his door to strangers, but he felt like it was the right thing to do. He went back to cleaning, but his eyes kept drifting to the booth where Margaret and Daniel now sat. The boy had finally smiled as he dipped his bread into the soup. The grandmother looked tired, but her shoulders had relaxed, as though for the first time in weeks she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. That night, after locking the doors and turning off the neon open sign, Michael laid out some pillows and extra blankets for them. Daniel was already asleep, curled up in the booth, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Margaret whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Michael replied softly, "You don't need to. Just get some rest." He went upstairs to the small apartment above the restaurant where he lived. But even as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the grandmother and the child below. Who were they really? What had they endured? And why did he feel such a strong pull to help them? He didn't know it yet, but this night would be the first step in a journey that would transform not only their lives but also his own. The next morning, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air as Michael prepared breakfast. When Margaret and Daniel awoke, their faces lit up at the sight of scrambled eggs, toast, and hot chocolate. Daniel ran to the table eagerly, while Margaret gave Michael a look that was part gratitude, part disbelief. "We can't repay you for this," she said. Michael waved her off. "Don't worry about it, just eat." As the days went by, what was supposed to be one night stretched into 2, then 3. Every time Michael thought about asking them to leave, he saw Daniel's smile or Margaret's tired eyes, and he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Customers noticed the pair sometimes sitting in a corner booth, and though some whispered and judged, others smiled warmly, sensing the quiet kindness that lived in the walls of Harbor Lights. But Michael's decision would soon bring consequences he never expected, some heartbreaking, some miraculous. Because when you open your heart to others, you never know how deeply it will change your own life. And for Michael, Margaret, and the days that followed were not easy, yet they were filled with moments that began to reshape Michael's life in ways he never imagined. What had started as one night of shelter became a week, and then another, as the fragile grandmother Margaret and the little boy Daniel slowly became part of the rhythm of the restaurant. Margaret insisted on helping around the kitchen, washing dishes, wiping tables, sweeping floors, anything she could do to repay Michael's kindness. Though her hands trembled with age and hardship, there was a gentleness in her work, and the regular customers began to notice her presence. Daniel, shy at first, grew bolder with each passing day, his laughter echoing through the dining room as he played with salt shakers, napkins, and sometimes even greeting customers as though he were a miniature host. For Michael, who had lived alone for years with only the hum of refrigerators and the clatter of pans for company, the sound of a child's laughter was like music he had long forgotten. Yet even as warmth blossomed in his restaurant, storm clouds gathered quietly on the horizon. Word spread among some townsfolk that Michael was harboring strays, as one man coldly put it, and gossip whispered that it was unsafe or unwise for a business owner to let homeless strangers stay. One evening, as Michael wiped down the counter, a long-time customer named George leaned in and muttered, "You're a good man, Mike, but watch yourself. Folks are talking. Not everyone's gonna see what you're doing as kindness." Michael forced a smile, but his heart sank. He didn't care about gossip, but he feared what might happen if the authorities decided he was breaking health codes or misusing his business. He looked at Margaret, whose fragile frame bent as she stacked chairs, and at Daniel, who was proudly drawing pictures of the restaurant on a napkin. Something inside him whispered, "I can't abandon them now." Then one night, the test of his resolve came. A city official visited after hearing rumors, warning Michael that allowing non-paying lodgers to stay overnight could lead to fines or even closure of the restaurant. Margaret overheard the conversation and broke down in tears, begging Michael to let her and Daniel leave so they wouldn't ruin his livelihood. Daniel clung to his grandmother, his eyes wide with fear, whispering, "Grandma, I don't want to go back to the streets." Michael stood frozen, the weight of choice pressing heavily on his chest. He thought of his late wife, of the nights he had spent grieving alone, and of the emptiness he had carried for so long. He realized that in helping Margaret and Daniel, he had begun to heal himself too. So he took a deep breath, looked the official straight in the eye, and said, do what you need to do. But they're staying. This restaurant isn't just about food, it's about people, and I won't turn them away. The official frowned, scribbled notes, and left, muttering about consequences. Margaret sobbed softly, whispering, "Why would you risk everything for us?" Michael placed a hand on hers and replied, "Because someone has to." What followed could only be described as extraordinary. A customer who had overheard the confrontation that night shared the story on social media. The post read, "Local restaurant owner risks his business to shelter a homeless grandmother and her grandson. True kindness still exists." Within days, the story went viral. Strangers from across the city began flocking to Harbor Lights, not just to eat, but to support Michael's courage and compassion. Business boomed in a way Michael hadn't seen in years. Lines formed outside the door, and customers asked to meet the grandmother and the boy. At first, Margaret felt embarrassed, hiding in the kitchen, but Daniel soaked up the attention, showing off his drawings and charming customers with his innocent smile. Soon, reporters arrived, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Michael, uncomfortable with the spotlight, kept insisting, "It's not about me, it's about doing the right thing." Yet the community saw it differently. They saw a man who had risked everything for two people the world had overlooked, and they wanted to be part of his story. Donations poured in, some for the restaurant, some directly for Margaret and Daniel. One morning, Michael opened an envelope to find a letter from a stranger who had been moved by the viral post. Inside was a check large enough to cover months of rent and expenses. Tears filled his eyes as he read the words, "Thank you for reminding us of what humanity means." Daniel, their story had only just begun. A broken bar,